Today's daf is daf Nun Vav, and we'll begin on the bottom of Nun Hayim and Beis, the first of the wide lines. V'hashta denafkalemi v'shocher es achatos. So the Gemara has a whole series of psukim, actually three different psukim, with regard to the carbon chatos and the requirement of tzafon. And the question is, what about the case of a chatos that doesn't require tzafon? And the Gemara here on Daf Nun Hey Amid Beis has an extra pasuk, also, and that pasuk appears in the parsha of the chatos, which is called the Sa'ir of the Nasi. And now what we're saying is that from the pasuk of Oso, we see a mute, and that's going to teach me that with regard to the Nasi, when he violates Bishogeg, a very severe Avera, and he has to bring a special Sa'ir, he has to be a special male goat as a Karban Chatos, then we're going to use the pasuk Oso as a mute to exclude. And the reason the Gemara is not happy with this is because we have all these psukim from which we derive the conclusion that a Karban Chatos does in fact require tzafon. So therefore, we're going back to the drawing board. If all chatos required tzafon, then what is the purpose of the miyut, the extra word oso, in the parsha of chatos nasi? And that's what the Gemara asks here on the bottom of Daf Nun Hayim and Beis, oso lim'ute mai. You cannot tell me that Oso is telling me that only the chatos of a nasi requires tzafon, because we already derived here on Daf Nun Hayim and Beis from many psukim that every chatos requires tzafon. So then what is Oso in the parsha of nasi? What is it coming to exclude? And the Gemara answers le'me'ute, and now we have three words that are mnemonic devices, which is nachshon, shochat, oaf. And what's nachshon? Oso b'tzofon, v'ein soyer nachshon b'tzofon, meaning at the Chanukas HaMizbeach, each nasi brought a special karban chatos. And the first one to bring his karban chatos on behalf of Shevet Yehuda was none other than Nachshon. And the question is, does he require tzafon? Salkadait Chamina, I would think, Hoel Visrabi Le'inyan Smicha. We're going to see soon that the karban of the Nasi, which is called Seir Nachshon, that requires smicha, like any other chatos, and lisrabi nami le'inyan tzafon. I might extend that equation between the soyer of nachshon and every other chatos to include not only smicha but also tzafon, and therefore I need the word oso in the parsha of seir nasi to exclude the requirement of tzafon in the case of the soyer nachshon. Usmucha gufi minolan. How do we know that the Sa'ir Nachshon requires smicha? The sanya that we learned in the Brisa, v'samach yadol rosh hasa'ir, And the Torah could have said V'samach yado al rosh, because we know that in the psukim, in the context there, it's referring to a sa'ir. So what is the word sa'ir coming as a riboy l'rabo sa'ir nachshon l'smicha divrei Rabbi Yehuda? So we have the first shita now in this brisa. That's the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, that sa'ir nachshon requires smicha based on the extra pasuk ha-sa'ir. And now the brisa is going to go on and quote the dissenting view of Rabbi Shimon, who's going to use the extra word sa'ir in the pasuk of V'samach for a different purpose, not for sa'ir nachshon, which means that according to Rabbi Shimon, sa'ir nachshon in fact doesn't require smicha, but rather here on the top of Daf Nun Vav, l'rabos se'irei avodas kol chavim l'smicha, that in the event that the mistaken ruling of the Sanhedrin caused the people to violate Avodah Zarah, and they have to bring out a soyer lechatos, is Reb Shimon holds that the extra word soyer comes to be marbe, that the soyer of Avodah Zarah requires smicha. And right now the Gemara has a rejection here of our attempt at answering that the oso is coming limuute tzafon in the case of Sar Nachshon, and the Havamina that Sar Nachshon should require tzafon is based on smicha. So Ravina says Teinach Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Shimon my equal memar. Rabbi Shimon in fact holds that the Sar Nachshon does not require smicha. So why was there a Havamina that the Sar Nachshon would require tzafon? And we need, therefore, the miut of Oso in the parasha of Nasi to exclude the case of Sar Nachshon. We don't need it because Sar Nachshon does not require smicha according to Rabbi Shimon. Amalei Mar Zutra Bered Rav Mari Ravina. Mar Zutra comes to respond to Ravina's objection. Rabbi Yehuda Nami, don't even think that we have an answer that's adequate according to the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that there is a requirement of smicha in the Sar Nachshon. My disrabi is Rabbi, my delo is Rabbi, lo is Rabbi. If Rabbi Yehuda derives from the extra word soyer that a Sar Nachshon requires smicha, fine. So the Sar Nachshon requires smicha, but that doesn't prove anything about the requirement of tzafon. So once again, we're back to square one. We don't understand why we need oso in the parasha of Nasi to exclude Sar Nachshon. There's no havamina that Sar Nachshon would require tzafon. V'chi tema, says Mar Zutra, ilo ta'ame kra, even if we didn't have this mute of tzafon, havamina, I still would have a havamina. So again, even though we don't have a havamina based on smicha, but nevertheless, havamina teisei bebinyanav, which means that we have a binyanav that was mentioned back on Daf Nun Hey that derives from the pasuk in Vayikra Perek Vav regard to a regular soyer lechatos, that any chatos requires tzafon. And if that be the case, then we'd have a havamina to say that the nachshon carbon chatos also requires tzafon. So leave out the whole discussion about smicha. We're going to base our havamina here on a binyanav, from the regular classic chatos to all other chatos, including that of Nachshon, to require tzafon. So the Gemara rejects this and says, Smicha gufa lishto kra mine. Then I don't understand. Why do you need an exclusion of smicha according to Rabbi Shimon? Is v'teisei mibinyan av. And therefore, since we have the binyan av, let's leave out smicha. So I made a mistake. I said Rabbi Shimon. I meant to say Rabbi Yehuda. Right? Rabbi Yehuda has a ribui for smicha in the case of Nachshon, of the Sar Nachshon. Why does he need a ribui for smicha? Why not derive from the binyan av? Ella, apparently this binyan av doesn't get off the ground as far as Nachshon is concerned, because Sisha Midoros Lo Yalfinon. We cannot derive any conclusions from Lidoros to Lisha. Meaning that the Chatos of Nachshon was Lisha. It was only for that moment in time when they did the Chanukas HaMizbeach. And you can't derive from other Chatos, which are Lidoros, for all eternity, any conclusions about a Chatos Lisha. Is Hachinami here too, when you're talking about the question of Tzafon, is Shah Midoros Lo Yalfina. And therefore, once again, we're back to square one. We don't need the word oso to exclude a Sawyer Nachshon, because Sawyer Nachshon is Le Shah, not Le Doros. So we'd never have a Havamina that you should require Tzafon in the case of Sawyer Nachshon. So now the Gemara tries a different approach. Ela also ton tzafon. What happens if the shochet is standing in the south of the Azara with a long knife stretched into the tzafon? So the animal, the zevach for a korban chatos, is located in tzafon. And you might think that it's not enough that the animal be in the tzafon. We need that the shochet himself be in the tzafon. And the answer is no. I use the word oso to exclude the shochet. Oso ton tzafon velo shochet. Gemara says, I don't get it. I know that from Rabbi Achia nafka. The Sanya Rabbi Achia Omer v'shochet oso yerech hamizbeach tzofona ma talmud lomar. What is this pasuk coming to teach us the word oso? Now, this shouldn't be confused with the word also in the parsha of Sar Nasi. This is at the beginning of Vayikra. Lefi shematzinu b'mekabel sha'omet b'tzafon v'kabel b'tzafon v'im ambidar v'kibel b'tzafon pasul is afkan yochel afkan kein tamid lomer oso b'tzafon lo hashochet tzarich lios omet b'tzafon. So we have now a miut to exclude that the shochet does not have to be bitzofon. It's enough that the animal, the zevach, is bitzofon, and that we derive from the oso in the parsha of, at the beginning of Sefer Yikra, shochet oso al yerech hamizbeach sofona, and therefore I don't need another drasha, another miut from oso in the parsha of Nasi to exclude the case where the shochet is standing in the daram with a long knife and shechting the animal, which is located in the tzafon, because I know already that omed b'tzafon is not, as far as shechita is concerned, is not to be equated with Kabbalah, meaning according to Rav Achia, dafka in Kabbalah Saddam, we need that the Kohen himself be located in the tzafon to be mekabel adam, and if the Kohen is not located, the Kohen HaMakabel is not located in the tzafon at the time of Kabbalah Saddam, the korban is pasul. But as far as tzafon is concerned, that requirement is only on the zevach, but not on the Kohen who is doing the shechita. Talmud Lomer, and this we learn from oso b'tzafon v'lo hashochet tzarich lios omed b'tzafon. So now we are back to square one again. We don't know why oso is necessary as a miut in the parsha of Nasi, because he can't tell me it's coming to be mimayit a case where the shochet is standing in the darom, because that I already derived from Rabbi Achia. Ella oso b'tzofon v'ein ben of b'tzofon. I need the word oso in the parasha of chatas of a nasi, in the case where the nasi has to bring a soyer, to exclude a case of malika bechatas of. That I might think in the case of malika bechatas of, the Kohen has to be located in the tzofon. And for that, I need the word also to tell me that in Malika there is no din of tzafon. And rather, the din of tzafon only applies to shchita, not to Malika in the case of an oath. Salke dait chamina, what was the havamina to say that the Kohen has to be standing in the tzafon when he does the Malika of the chatas ha'of? Leisei b'kavachomer mi ben son. Because oaf is more chamur than a behemoth. Why? Ma ben son, in the case of a flock, meaning an animal. Shalo kavalo kohen. We don't need that the kohen do the shchita, even what we call shchita ksher bizarre. Even a non-kohen could do the shchita kavalo tzafon, and yet the Torah says that in the case of chatos, the kohen has to be located in the north. Is ben oaf, which is more chomer shekavalo kohen. No one who's not a Kohen could do Malika. So therefore Malika is more chomer than Shchita. Is Einodin how much more so? Shenikva lo tzafon. And that's why we need the Pasuk also in the parsha of the Chatas of a Nasi to exclude Of. Because I might say that Of should require tzafon with a Kal Chomer. It's more chomer than Zevach. And the Gemara rejects it. Ma ben son shekain kavalo kli. The Torah requires that the shechita of a tzon be done with a klishares. Maybe he tells you here where the drasha is for that. Oh yeah, from the Akedah, because in the parsha of the Akedah it says Vayishlach Avram es Yado, Vayikach es hamacheles lishchodes beno, and we learn that this macheles is what achieves the avodah of shchita, and that requires a klishares. But in the case of Oaf, where he only uses his thumbnail to do the malika, there's no requirement of a klishares, and therefore we see that the Torah is more machmir in Ben Tzon than it is in Ben Oaf. So once again, what was the havamina to assume that I need also in the parsha of Nasi to exclude what? Ella also Batzofim Pesach Batzofim, to exclude a Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is brought on the 14th of Nisan in the afternoon. And the question is, where does the Kohen have to stand when he shechs the Korban Pesach? And I might think that the Korban Pesach, Salkatay Kamina, should require tzafon, Kamashma, the word also, comes to exclude Korban Pesach. Frek the Gemara, I don't understand. Pesach, Mida Eliezer ben Yaakov Nafka, Desanya, we have a brisa that we can exclude tzafon as a requirement in Korban Pesach. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Yochel Pesach Ton Tzafon. I might have had Avmin to say the Pesach, which is more chamur than a Korban Ola, because a Korban Ola is a Korban Adova, you bring it whenever you want. But Korban Pesach, everyone is obligated to bring it. And therefore, Yochel Pesach Dinu Ma Ola Shelo Kavalo Zman L'Shchita Kavalo Tzafon. Right, the Korban Ola, you need Tzafon. And lo kavalo zman means that you could bring a korban ola as a nidava, as a voluntary korban, whenever you feel you want to bring it. And nevertheless, even though you have that kula of lo kavalo zman, nevertheless, kavalo tzafon is pesach shekavalo zman l'shchitaso eno din shekavalo tzafon. How much more so korban pesach, where there's a kviyas man, you have to bring the korban on the 14th of Nisan. You don't have any flexibility here, and the Torah is being more machmir. In the case of korban pesach, for sure it would require tzafon, and for that I need the pasuk also to tell me that korban pesach does not require tzafon. So the Gemara rejects it and says, Mala ola shekain kolil. You know what? You can't derive a chumrah of tzafon in the case of Pesach from the case of Ola. Ola is more chamer than a korban Pesach, despite the fact that an Ola doesn't have a zman kavua, but nevertheless it's kulo kolil. It's completely burnt on the mizbeach. That's unique to a korban Ola. A korban Pesach is eaten by the Kohanim, by the Israelim. And the Gemara says, now, michatos. If we can't learn a kal vachomer from Ola to Pesach, let's fill in chatos. And we're going to try to prove now that Korban Pesach is more chomer than chatos, and if chatos requires a tzafon, how much more so does Pesach require a tzafon? Now, let's understand. Chatos does not have the chumrah of Ola, which we use that chumrah to slug up any derivation of tzafon in Pesach from Ola. So therefore, chatos doesn't have his man kavua. Again, keep in mind, even though chatos is a korban chova, it's not like Ola, which is a korban adava. And the man violated a chi of karis b'shogeg, he's got to bring karchatz, but there's no time limitation. He doesn't have to bring it on one date in the Hebrew calendar. And therefore, the Torah is more machmer in Pesach that requires the carbon to be brought on the 14th. And the Gemara slugs it up. It says, Chatos is more chomer than Pesach. In Pesach, there's no element of kapara for any sin, and yet Chatos is a korban amachaper for a chi of karis. May Asham, maybe you'll quote it from Asham, because Asham doesn't have that chumrah of mechaperes al chiv kares, and the Gemara says, and at the same time, it doesn't have the chumrah of kviyus man, and therefore I might derive that just like Asham requires safon, Korban Pesach should certainly with a kavachom require safon. Asham sheken kodesh kala. You can't derive a Korban Pesach, which is not Kodesh Kodshim, from Asham, which is Kodesh Kodshim. Mikula Nami. And if you want to try a Binyanav or a Tzadashova from all the above, that won't help you. Shekin Kodesh Kodshim, meaning whether it's Ola, whether it's Chatos, whether it's Asham, it's always a Kodesh Kodshim, and Pesach is not a Kodesh Kodshim. The Torah is more Mekil in Pesach than it is with all these other Karbanos. So what's the Hava meaning that you should require Tzafon in Korban Pesach? Eliolam says the Gemara Kedamrina Meikar. We have to go back to our original answer to this question. Also b'tzofon ve'nasholche b'tzof. We need the word also in the parasha of Nasi to exclude a case, to exclude a psul of tzafon, meaning a chisaron of the lack of tzafon in the case where the shochet is located in the doro. But now you'll ask me, as we asked before, Rav Chia Nafka, we derive this from Rabbi Achia. And Rabbi Achia told us already that the shochet in the case of a requirement of tzafon, he himself doesn't have to be in the tzafon. Now we're going to rewrite the script of Rabbi Achia. Lav lemute shochet v'tzafon udiasa. Rabbi Achia never meant to say that I exclude the psul of heder, lacking of tzafon, in the case where the Kohen is in the Daron. Elahachi Kamer. So what was Rabbi Achia actually saying? So in other words, we have a pasuk that's going to teach me that you require tzafon, and that only refers to the zevach, to the exclusion of the zoveach, the shochet. But why do we need that drasha of Rabbi Achia? Is to teach me that although shchita doesn't require tzafon, if the shochet is in the darom and the animal is in the tzafon, but as far as Kabbalas Hadam is concerned, it's not sufficient that the Kli was there in the tzafon and the Kohen was outside in the darom. No, the Kohen himself has to be situated in the tzafon in order to be Makabel Hadam. So the Gemara says, I don't get it. You're telling me I need the word also to teach me that in the case of Kabbalas Hadam, it's not sufficient that the carbon itself is in the tzafon. I need that the kohen and makabel is in the tzafon. I know that already. Makabel milokach velokach nafka. Right? You see the first two letters of the word velokach, vav lamed. If you switch around the order of the vav and the lamed, and you read it as lo, and it means that lokach, which is a reference as we've had many times in this Masechta and in Tzvakim, referring to Kabbalas Hadam, lo. Lo means he has to be Makabal Hadam in the Tzafon. And if that be the case, it's not true that Rav Achia would use the miyut of oso to exclude Kabbalah, because I know that Kabbalah requires that the Kohen be in the Tzafon. And the Gemara answers, Lokach v'lokach lo mashma. Rav Achia doesn't hold from this drasha that the vav together with the lamed of lokach is lo. So therefore he needs a special pasuk, which is a miyut of oso, to tell me that even though in other karbonos it's enough that the zevach is in the tzafon, in other avodos, excuse me, that it's enough that the zevach is in the tzafon, but in the case of Kabbalah, we need also that the makabel is in the tzafon. And that ends that sugya. Now we go back to the Mishnah. And the Mishnah says that as far as the lav in the Torah, which generates malchus, of causing the mincha to be leavened, to be chametz, the Mishnah establishes chayv al ishasav al erichasav al afiyasav. All the preparations of the mincha, whether it be the kneading, with a K, kneading, whether it be the shaping, and that's called aricha, whether it be the afiyah, the baking itself, they all generate malchus if he ends up with a mincha of chametz. Omer Rav Papa, afa'ah lokeshtayim. Whoa, big chiddush here, Rav Papa, that you get two sets of malchus for baking. Why? Achas al arichasa v'achas al afiyasa. Meaning, even if the Kohen was not directly and obliquely involved in aricha, meaning in shaping the dough, when he bakes it, the baking itself shapes the dough, and now he's chayav for two violations, for the violation of aricha, of shaping, and the violation of afiyah, of baking. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. For Amrit, we had a brisa back on Daf Nun Hey. Ma afiyah miuchedesh imaisi yechidi v'chayav nolem atzma. We said that afiyah is distinct. It's not a hachana hechsher. It's not a preparatory action, but rather, even if you cut it out completely from the other actions, like aricha, then nevertheless it's prohibited on its own, in and of itself. And you're chai b'fnei atzma. So if we've separated afiyah as a chiyuv b'fnei atzmo, as a criminal act in and of itself, then how can you tell me that he gets shtayim, that he gets another malchus for aricha? Afiyah sets itself up as a separate, independent avera. Lo kasha hadi arechu v'yafahu hadi archavre v'yoev le v'yaf. The brisa that says that you only get one set of malchus, that's a case where there are two people involved in preparing the chametz, which is an avera. There was also the orich. The orich means the one who shapes the dough, and his name we'll call him Ruvain. And on top of that, Shimon was the one who took the dough from Ruvain after it was shaped and put it into the oven and baked it. And in such a case, the baker is chayav only one set of malchus. And let's try to understand why. Since Ruvain did the shaping, the aricha, then Shimon, even though the baking in and of itself could be considered shaping as well, as we said, because inherent in the baking is the shaping, but nevertheless, Reuven already did the shaping. So when Shimon steps into the array, he already has a dough that's past aricha. It's already been shaped. So he can only be chayiv one chatos. But let's say Reuven was not in the picture, and there was no one who did the aricha, but Shimon did the afia. Shimon will be chayiv shtayim, because inherent in the baking is also an act of aricha, of shape. Tana Rabbanu, we learned to the Brisa, b'chor shachazo dam, makizin oso es hadam. Well, this is going to be a major machlokes. You already have some sort of a blemish in the b'chor. It's already congested with blood, and therefore, according to Rabbi Meir, that's the first Tana here recorded in this Brisa, you have no problem of doing making an incision in the animal and making it a balas mum, because it already has a mum, and therefore you could be makiz oso es hadam, right? You could bloodlet from this bechar that had this blemish. However, even Rabbi Meir, who seems to be very makil here, and he allows hakozas adam because it's already a balas mum, ein mekizas adam b'makom shosim bo mum. So what does it mean osim bo mum? That would be either the eyes of the animal or the ears of the animal. That would make it a balas mum. So don't do hakozah in those places. Divrei Rabbi Meir. But in other parts of the body of the animal, you're allowed to do hakozah, even though you're letting blood out of the animal, and it makes it into a balas mum, because it already is a balas mum by virtue of the achazodam. So that's one opinion of four opinions. Now we get to the second opinion. The Chachamim omrim yakiz af b'mokum she'osim bo mum. Wow. The Chachamim take it even a step further than Mekil, all the way around, and they say you could do akaza even in the ear, which might make the animal deaf and make it into a balmum. And we couldn't care less, because the animal is already a balmum by virtue of the fact that achazo dam ubevad shelo yishchot al osom mum. He shouldn't do the shchita of the animal on account of that blemish, because we might suspect the Kohen. See, the Kohen here has vested interest. If the animal will be a balmum, then the normal halach of Bechar wouldn't apply. And the Bechar now goes to the Kohen. So he gains a lot of money here, and the Bechar is his. So if he shechts it at that point where there's a mum, it might look like he himself made that cut and created a mum, biyadayim, with his hands he made it into a balmum, so that he could keep the Bechar. So avoid shchita in that place. Rabbi Shimon Omer, now we have a third shita, and that is Rabbi Shimon. And what is the shita of Rabbi